Hey. Hello. Welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Upley and my co-host Brian Sanders. How you doing, Brian?
I'm great.
Yes.
Yeah.
I temporarily forgot the name of the show about 4 seconds ago. So, welcome back. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We squeaked it in just under 8:30 tonight, so I feel proud about that. I feel like that's a win. I'll take any of the wins I can get.
The best.
So tonight we are back with Night Shift. It is a true crime podcast. We're also a live YouTube show. So every Tuesday night we air live on the Andre Up Late YouTube channel. And then we stream wherever you listen to your podcast. So iTunes, Spotify, I think iHeart, Google, I don't know, wherever they allow them, we tend to go. Which it sounds like North Korea is where we can go now.
Oh,
Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I heard they're allowing tourism again.
I'm just saying.
I think was the headline. So it's like, again,
if you wanted to plan a trip for us, I'm just letting you know.
I don't remember the last time they were allowing tourists there. So the again part in the headline was a little different.
But either way, welcome back. And we appreciate you guys tuning in, whether you are watching or listening. If you're a first time here, Brian Sanders is a retired homicide lieutenant. So he provides a lot of expertise when we're talking about these cases. We generally cover unsolved or unresolved. This is a different one tonight. It is solved, but it is a bit wild and solved in not the way anybody would have necessarily thought. So we're going to get into that. Also speaking, we generally, if you are a first-time listener, welcome. But also we like to talk a little bit at the beginning about pop culture and the year in which the case that we're talking about took place. This case could be noted to take place over a few different years. So we just picked one of those years and we're going to go with that. And then toward the end of the show, we engage in the chat. So feel free to hop on, log into YouTube. It's free. You can be in the chats with us as we carry on the show tonight. So Brian Sanders, I'm going to give you the mic here for all the pop culture goodies. What year are we doing tonight?
1990.
Okay, perfect.
So George Bush Sr. was president.
Okay.
So that kind of sets the
HW.
Yeah. So we're going back quite a ways. So you go back to 1990. Music, of all songs, "Free Fallin'" by Tom Petty.
Hey, just singing that.
Yes, yeah. So that was one of the big hits. "Janie's Got a Gun" by Aerosmith.
Okay, I know how you feel about Aerosmith. I think you're coming around a little bit, actually.
I will say I do. It was funny when I saw the song title. I thought, I remember that song. I actually remember back then thinking it's actually good in the sense that it has a little message.
Oh, it's got a big message.
You know what I mean? Like the lyrics are not just, hey, let's go get drunk and hang out.
Right.
So that one, Belle Biv DeVoe's "Poison."
Oh, heck yeah.
I feel like we talk about Poison quite a bit. Like,
I mean, I might have to turn it on after the show.
Yeah. I think your favorite band of all time had a hit song that year called "This One's for the Children." Do you know what that song is?
It's not.
Or what that band is?
Is it a Michael Jackson song?
It's a New Kids on the Block song, I guess.
Actually, I don't.
I told you I may have gone a little too obscure.
I thought I was their number one fan.
I may have even mixed that up. That may have been a completely different.
Maybe. Is that one of their? Oh, it's one from 1990.
Yeah, maybe that was White Line. I don't know.
Maybe.
Either way, I won't even mention that "Ice Ice Baby" by Vanilla Ice was 1990. I'm not even going to mention that.
I have so much to say there. Listen, Van Winkle. I've been asking you to come on the show, Van Winkle.
So those who follow you on Instagram, what was it, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, 3 months ago?
What?
When the bet was kind of going of who was going to respond if Vanilla Ice, Rob Van Winkle would respond or
Tony Danza.
I think you even had a countdown.
I got notified by authorities to leave Tony Danza alone, so I had to kind of get quiet over there for a minute, but we'll resume that.
He seems like a cool guy, so does Rob Van Winkle, like Vanilla Ice.
Yes.
before we get there, the car of the year, not really, it was considered probably one of the worst cars. The Yugo. Do you remember a Yugo?
I do.
Cabrio, I guess is how you pronounce it. I don't know. That was a car.
That was a car.
Yes. Minimum wage was $3.80 per hour. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. Smoking bans started. Okay. Started on airlines and then started out in California in the bars and then just spread across the country. Until in
1990?
1990.
I think that took off slowly.
Yeah, because
if it started in 90, that was not a quick progression.
Yeah, I just thought about that. Like, yeah, people were still smoking. I was
definitely in the club at the bar.
Yeah.
After that, and it was not banned yet.
Yeah. Where did we go? Crime at the time. This was like one of the largest stolen property thefts in history. 1990. 12 paintings were stolen along with the Shang Dynasty vase. I say vase. Worth over $500 million. Stolen from the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston.
Was it my friend Walter?
It sounds like it. Although it says they never recovered the property or made an arrest or anything like that. So it may or may not have been.
I may have an Uber driver turned friend that has promised he'll come on the show one time. And one of his stories might involve a painting returned to the trunk of an FBI agent's car.
Yeah, he tells some wild stories. I would love to hear more. So I knew when I ran across that, I knew you'd like that. Misery was one of the big movies that year. Ooh. With Kathy Bates. She won Best Actress.
Okay.
Goodfellas was the big hit in 1990 as well. Television series. I pulled two very obscure shows.
Okay.
They both only had one season each. One was called The Outsiders.
Oh, okay.
Based on the movie and book. What you talking about? Billy Bob Thornton played in it. He had one or two roles.
I'm down now.
Or one or two like episodes or something, minor roles. And then a Ferris Bueller TV show that was one season.
90 is weird, and we talked about this a lot, I think we talked about it a little bit last night watching some of those old videos, but 1990 is like, I would say 1990 to 95 is like the 80s, like without the taste, like without the flavor. It's just like,
yeah, that's a good description. Yes.
So the TV series off of those movies.
Well, that's why they were only one season.
Yeah.
In Ferris Bueller, they had Jennifer Aniston for some role. I don't know. Cloris Leachman and Tone Loc.
Gosh.
All right. One of the big crimes of that year. It's a good transition piece, but one of the good crime, not good. One of the main crimes of that year was Pamela Smart.
Oh,
which the name sounded familiar at first, and I couldn't. But she was a 22-year-old teacher who had an affair with a 15-year-old student, and the teenage student shot and killed her husband.
I remember that vaguely.
Yeah,
I remember it being it cropped up more as more of those female teachers were doing those types of things, maybe minus the shootings.
Yeah.
When you get what's his name? Her name. Mary.
Joe Letourneau.
Letourneau.
Or something.
Right. Yeah. The one I did the Tony Danza reel with.
Yes.
I don't know why he's not responding. Yeah. So whenever like those, like she was such a big one, but like then that Pamela Smart would then start to crop up. I think the talk of that.
Yeah. And then in general, 1990 was one of kind of the peak years of violent crime. You're coming out of the 80s with crack epidemic and the spread of gang violence like that. And then throughout the 90s, a lot of incarceration, a lot of proactive policing and stuff. But in 1990, police were still in that proactive phase of the war on drugs and that sort of thing. Very high rate of homicides across the country. That's it. That wraps
Is
it.
that it?
Sorry.
Why did I say sorry? I literally tasked you with that. All right, guys, let's dig into it. This one's gonna take a minute. Hey, Bosco, Davey, we got Jill Billy in the house. Jill, I hadn't seen her in a while, so that's awesome. Michael Hendricks, we got Silly, we got I said Davey, we got David. Again, if you're new here, just log into YouTube and you can hop in the chats. It's free. All you need is an email and a password. Again, I think one was stamped on your forehead at birth. So we are going to start tonight with, I think I labeled the show Pseudo-Suicide, the Diabolical Dentist. And so we are going to be talking about the case that involves the dentist, Bart Corbin, and then another woman or two or three or 10. Okay. So let's get started now. So his name is Barton, Barton, but he went by Bart. So Bart Corbin was born in Jacksonville, Florida on December 22nd, 1963, along with a twin brother, Brad. So their dad was a military policeman and their mom was a bank teller. Now, when Bart was 7, his family moved about 400 miles north to Atlanta, Georgia. Bart has said that he had low self-esteem in school. He was a bit overweight and teased as a kid. And as he got older, though, he did excel in football. So his twin brother, Brad, was much more known for academia, and Bart, while doing well in school, was much more the athlete. So he focused his efforts on football. I will say moving into adulthood, he was in like great shape, kept himself in shape, but continued to actually have like not a good opinion of himself. Did something happen? You good? Okay. No. So he's concentrating on football. Now he's in high school, and he was known by this time to start changing his demeanor at the flip of a switch. Okay. So he was described even back then as emotionally unpredictable, and without warning, his temper would flare. Much later in his future, Brad, his twin brother Brad's wife, would say, again, many years later, all 3 boys, and this would be talking about the 3 brothers, the Corbin brothers, all 3 boys speak loudly by my standards, she observed. I think it is born of being a part of a busy home. When they get excited or upset about something, they get louder. I think people could interpret this as anger. So I'm going to let you guys kind of think on that for a moment and then listen to the events that I will be describing later and tell me if you think it's just being loud coming from a loud household. Or if it indeed is anger. And then you, Brian, be thinking about the fact that we often talk about how when some sort of a mental disorder, or meaning like a mental health issue, a schizophrenia, a bipolar, a borderline, these things aren't generally diagnosed until late teens, early 20s, because that's really when the symptoms start to present themselves. This is about the time that people started noticing this temperament in him. But decide if you think that it's something like that, or this is just how he is. So Bart's parents had often encouraged him to become a dentist. And in 1983, they were thrilled when he enrolled at the University of Georgia's pre-dentistry program. Okay, so he played football there for the Georgia Bulldogs. I would say go Dogs. I can't allow myself to do that. Bart graduated UGA in 1986 and was accepted into the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta to study dentistry. So again, while his brother was much more the academic, Bart was a smart fella. Like, you're not getting into dentistry with nothing there. He just had to work a little bit harder at it and, again, focus more on the athletic side of things. So a classmate from that time, who is now Dr. Alfred Aguero, has stated, quote, Bart had an explosive temper. He got mad pretty easily. So there was one notable time when Bart took lab equipment, like as he's studying, right, for class, and hurled it across the room and it shattered against the wall. So that's kind of it. So we were getting from high school up, and now then college and undergrad, and then in his dentistry program, we have pretty consistent reports of not just like he was just this mean guy. It was that his temper was explosive, that he would flip on a switch. Okay. So Bart eventually graduated and became a dentist. And it was at this time that he met Jennifer Corbin. Well, she wasn't Corbin initially, right? So it was the spring of 1996, and she was a waitress at the restaurant that he was patroning. So they go on a few dates, and the relationship flourished really quickly for her friends and family. But a few months into the relationship, Bart took Jennifer on a trip to Italy. So you'll notice that they go on some pretty extravagant trips. Money was not a concern at this point. So they go to Italy. Again, this is just a few months into dating. And soon after they come home, Jennifer realizes that she's pregnant. So she talks to her family, and they just all kind of decide they're going to get married. So on September 1st, 1996, when Jennifer was 3 months pregnant, they get married. Now I'm going to read from where I took a voice note. So let's just hope my eyeballs can read it. Earlier today. Okay. So in March of 1997, little Dalton was born. So Dalton would be the oldest of eventually their 2 sons. At this point in their relationship, Bart's temper is starting to increase. So it doesn't take much for him to flip a switch into anger at any given moment. But for the most part, things were going okay. And in 1998, Jennifer found herself yet again pregnant. And to accommodate their growing family, moved to the affluent community of Beaufort, Georgia. They actually closed on their house there on January 18th, 1999, which was the exact same day that the little Dylan was born. So let's say that again. They closed on their home that they purchased the day the baby was born. So this is 1999. Oh. This is pre e-sign and, all the e-documents. This is physically going there to do it. So, so they give birth to little Dylan. So now they, have Dalton and Dylan. The boys are 2 years apart. Bart's career was, by outsiders' perspective, maybe thriving. But the reality was that Bart was struggling a little bit within his business. Again, he's a dentist. We have some patients who have later said that they were, just not super comfortable with him. We have coworkers of his that say that they felt kind of just uncomfortable in the sense of one said that he would be arrogant to her and that his bursts of anger were not just subjected to the home and to friends. It would happen at work as well. So Bart would often take Jennifer and the kids to her dad's boathouse that was at the Sunrise Cover Marina before he went to work in the summertime. So he would drop them off there and they would hang out. So they had their new home in Beaufort, and there Bart and Jennifer quickly became good friends with a couple that lived next door, the Cuomos. Okay? So it's going to be Kelly and Steve Cuomo. In fact, both families' oldest sons were born on the same day. Okay? So you know how it is when you live in a kind of a tight-knit little neighborhood. If you've got good friends that are neighbors, the Cuomos have said that Kelly and Jennifer had an understanding, they didn't even knock. They were like family. They would just go in each other's homes. They were, best buddies. So the fluctuations in Bart's temperament continue to be erratic. And Bart was unknown to Jennifer at the time. Bart was carrying on an ongoing relationship with a dental assistant at his practice. So it's even been made known that when Jennifer was pregnant with their second child, Bart actually confided in his mistress with his concerns about the pregnancy and how he felt that Jennifer should abort the pregnancy. His mistress has gone on record to say that at the end of the work days, they would, quote, make love in his office and then each go home to their families. You see, she was also married with 2 children. So with increasing anger and decreasing romantic emotion, which Jennifer could definitely feel from Bart, Jennifer became a bit withdrawn. She took to online gaming. So I'm going to see if you guys have ever heard of this game. She took to online gaming and started this role-playing game known as EverQuest. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't know anything about online.
Yeah, well, nor do I. But evidently it's one that you can have multiple friends. You can talk to people on it. It's got these layers to it. So it's kind of a social outlet for her a little bit. But she had become a bit depressed at home. And like I said, Bart's anger influx and then his romantic void for her was kind of taking a toll. So she actually kind of got hooked on this game. She was playing it quite often at home. And let's see here. Yeah, it's an online role-playing game. So she continued playing this game, sometimes spending hours a day on there. And so Bart started complaining to family and friends about her increasing online activity and decreasing time with him. So he was a needy little fella, right? He kind of wanted to do what he wanted to do. but she better be paying him attention. She had to have the house cleaned a certain kind of way. I read one source where he wanted the house cleaned before he got home so that she could spend every moment with him when he walked in the door. And like, you can say that in a sweet kind of way, but I don't feel that that's how Bart made it be. I'm getting more like sleeping with the enemy vibes here. Do you remember the cans in the cupboard?
I don't mean to laugh, but remember?
Yes, I do. I do. The detail that he left out when he told other people about her online gaming activity was that he had some extracurricular activities as well. So eventually the word divorce starts getting tossed around in their home. One night they had a large argument, and Jennifer said she was just going to take the kids and go on and leave. But finally, Bart agreed to let Jennifer and the boys live in the home, and he said he would just move out. And then they wind up having another argument where he says, okay, you can have it, but you're going to have to be able to figure out how to pay for it yourself. So this is just kind of volatile. It's going back and forth. The arguments are gross. And she does actually go on and get a job as like a preschool teacher at a local like church preschool there. She's starting to try to take some steps toward maybe some independence. So this is when she got the job at the Sugar Hill Methodist Church preschool, and she was starting to, like I said, try to separate herself a bit from Bart financially. So once divorce talk was had, Jennifer began what ultimately became an internet affair herself. So, not good. She never meets this person, while it sounds like he's doing this on the daily with his dental assistant. All right. So she begins this conversation with someone named Chris from Missouri, on this EverQuest game. All right. So they continue to talk, and this increases pretty quickly. The chat, they would sometimes talk online through all hours of the night. The chat continues to grow more and more intense, and it starts to become sexual in nature. Okay. And now Jennifer's actually starting to have feelings for this stranger. So, but because Bart was also having an affair, he knew what signs to look for. And I think often, we talk about this when someone is engaging in a certain behavior themselves, they look for that in someone else, or they, get, paranoid that is what happened. We've talked recently a lot about like if someone is by nature a liar or a manipulator, they may feel that whatever you do, your angle is to lie or manipulate, and it's not even in your brain to do so, but that's just how their brain works. And so with him having this ongoing affair, he's starting to get jealous and paranoid that Jennifer is also having an affair. So he starts kind of searching the house and looking at things after her and just seeing if there's anything he can find, any kind of evidence or proof that maybe she is having an affair herself. So he's becoming increasingly paranoid. She's still never met this person in person, but they were exchanging thousands of messages online. So Bart starts searching the house to see if he can find anything to show that she's having an affair. But things really switched for Jennifer, because on Friday, November 10th, 2004, Chris tells Jennifer a secret now. This is who she's been talking to online, okay? Jennifer has been trying to talk to Chris on the phone, trying to plan in-person meetings, and Chris continues to avoid all of these things at all costs. What do you think that might mean?
That he is what now?
He refuses to speak to her on the phone. They just type. They just internet type. Yeah. So he refuses to speak to her on the phone, and he keeps kind of evading an in-person meeting.
So either he's married.
Okay.
Or he may be, a woman or something else and trying to hide that type of identity. Right?
Mm-hmm. Oh. I was reading our chats, and actually they're getting on it. Okay. So finally, Jennifer's going to get this surprise from Chris. So it was on this day in November that Chris tells Jennifer that actually Chris is a woman named Anita. So she's a woman and is married with children. Jennifer was completely blown away. She was actually kind of brokenhearted. She was starting to actually develop feelings for Chris. She cried herself to sleep, they say, that night. She had virtually fallen in love with the stranger online. Now, some of these things we know because she confided in her own sister. Okay. Jennifer did. So these things are not speculatory. These are things she had told her sister. So she had fallen in love, like I said, with that stranger online. And so Anita tells her that she's considering the fact that she's potentially bisexual, and she just wanted to see what it would be to talk to a woman in that kind of way. Okay. So as time goes by, they kind of cool off for a minute. But then Jennifer and Anita actually regain communication. They continue the plan to meet in person. So now they've decided that, or Jennifer's decided, like, that's fine. She doesn't care that Anita's a woman. She really has enjoyed talking to her, and she wants to meet with her. All right. So they continue in with their plan. So on Thanksgiving of 2004, this is where it hits the fan. And you guys, I don't often do trigger warnings, but like when it comes to domestic violence stuff, and especially when children are involved, I do want to go on and give you a heads up there. So Jennifer, Bart, and Dylan and Dalton, they go to Jennifer's sister's house in Dawsonville, Georgia, and they're celebrating the day, eating food, watching football. All right. Evidently, Bart was giving everyone kind of the cold shoulder, but by this point, they were used to it. Okay. They loved Bart. They had taken him in, but they were kind of used to his mood fluctuation. So he was not really jovial with her family at this time. So at 6 p.m., evidently, his mood shifts, and he comes in the room where Jennifer is and tells her to get her stuff and get the kids. They're going to the car. They're leaving. Mm-hmm. So this is only 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving. Okay. Oh. What's going on with our... I just got a weird... Sorry, guys. I just got a weird like text thing from YouTube asking if I need help, and all of a sudden it says 0 people are on here now.
Oh.
Yeah. Y'all let us know if for some reason we're not recording, but it says it is. All right. So her family says that Bart stormed in the room and his mood had changed. They're removing our content. Okay. We'll have to talk about this.
Okay.
Strange. Okay. So, I wonder if it's because I said domestic violence.
I don't know.
That's bizarre. Okay. So her family says that Bart stormed in the room and his mood had changed, and he tells Jennifer it's time to go and they all have to leave. Maybe send like an Instagram message to somebody that was on there. So on their way home, Jennifer realizes that they need some items from the grocery store, and she pulls into the parking lot. So, and listen while you're typing. So she only takes her wallet with her as she goes in the grocery store, and she leaves her purse in the car. So you've got Bart and the kids in the car. She walks in the grocery store. So he goes through her purse as soon as she goes inside. Remember, he's been paranoid and he hasn't wanted to, he's wanted to find proof that she's cheating or something like this. So she gets back in the car and he confronts her with a poem, a romantic poem that he had found that she had printed out from her email that had been sent to her by Anita. So he starts yelling at her about this. She puts the car in drive and starts to leave. So they're pulling out of the grocery store. They get on the road and he hauls off and punches her in the face while she's driving.
Yeah. You can keep talking, but Bosco's just
okay.
Saying, yeah, okay.
So he hauls off, punches her in the face. She's driving the car home.
Okay.
Did you hear any of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the kids are screaming and crying in the background, as you can imagine. They specifically mentioned that Dalton was hysterical. So Jennifer manages to drive them home. As soon as they get in the driveway, Bart hops out. He gets into his car and he drives off. At this time, Jennifer calls her dad. They decide that Jennifer and the kids should go back to her sister's house and stay there for a while. So on Monday, November 29th, 2004, Corbin filed for divorce initially. Bart was asking for everything. He wanted the kids, the house, the boat, full custody. He wanted alimony. And finally, on December 1st, Jennifer returned home with the kids. So she's just trying to buy time at this point, okay, until she can find a place like of her own or the divorce can become complete. They're kind of making it work, believe it or not. I mean, she's got this, but I feel like this is kind of a tale as old as time. We hear this often. It's not often in domestic violence that someone gets hurt and it just ends immediately, unfortunately, right? People do tend to stay together for a while sometimes. So on December 1st, like I said, she comes on back to the house. She was horrified to see that her purse had been emptied and some papers of hers, her journal, a new cell phone, and a credit card that she had were all gone. And he had them. So she ran upstairs and he had just gotten out of the shower. She confronts him with this information and he immediately turns rageful. He grabs just a towel and leaves the house. So he storms out in nothing but a towel. She's hysterical. She's chasing him down the stairs. Bart gets in his car and he starts to drive away. As she tries to block him in the driveway as he's driving, she's calling 911 because she's wanting the dispatcher to know that like he has her items, and I'll tell you why she called 911 about that in a moment. But as she gets on 911 phone call, he backs up intentionally and runs over her foot as she's screaming. So this is all on dispatch. It's all on a 911 call. You can even hear the children, unfortunately, screaming in the background as well. So police get there, but Jennifer refuses to press charges. I mean, you know, we hear that often too, you know. So bizarrely, after all of this, Jennifer and Bart come to some sort of an agreement that they are going to try their best to be amicable enough to be home together in front of the children until everything is taken care of. And Jennifer and Anita are still trying to go through with plans eventually to meet up in person. Oh my goodness. Okay, you caught up?
So yes, I made a note, but yeah, so you've already got it escalating, and
Big time.
In today's terms, most states it wouldn't matter whether she wanted to charge or not. Yeah.
Do you want to speak on that? I thought about that when I wrote it.
Yeah, years ago, and it's probably been within 25 years, 30 years, a lot of states made domestic violence laws. And basically, some states, it will say in their statutes that an officer shall arrest. I mean, they have to arrest if there's probable cause of domestic violence. That doesn't matter the gender, any of that. It's just when two people are in a relationship and violence ensues. So with something like that, where dispatch can hear what's going on, she's got injuries, it's consistent that, her foot, that he ran over her foot, whether she wants to cooperate or not, initially, he would be arrested and charged. Later, in court, maybe charges could be dismissed if the only witness, is the person, dating the suspect or married to the suspect.
Okay.
But either way, when these crimes occur, once someone's arrested, that's, kind of where the documentation often begins. Where probably back then, you didn't have a lot of documentation. You may not have even had reports where a detective can actually read it and go to trial and say, this is a cycle of abuse. This has been going on. Or sadly, if things escalate, detectives can now go into databases, read reports for 2 or 3 years worth of activity.
Okay.
And then understand how things escalate into some type of incident.
Right. Well, unfortunately, she did not press charges at that time. And so that was that. So early on the morning of December 4th, everything changed. This was 2004 for 33-year-old Jennifer Corbin. I feel like that's just going to keep coming through.
Yeah, we're good.
Local 911 dispatchers receive a call from Jennifer's neighbor, Kelly. Remember, they were the ones that were just best buddies. So Jennifer's son, Dalton, had walked into her bedroom to find his mother. So the 911 call goes as such. The 911 operator says, where is he at now? Because this is Kelly referring to Dalton. So she's calling 911 saying the little boy next door just ran over. So she's saying, where is he now? And she said, is he with you? And Kelly said, yes. And the operator said, okay, all right. How old is he? And Kelly says, 7. He's 7. And Kelly continues to go on and say, my girlfriend's dead. And they say, okay, what do you mean by that? And she said, she's been shot. Her son just ran over and got me. They live across the street from me. And they say, okay, do you think that she can be helped? And at that point, you hear Kelly just matter-of-factly say no. So what had happened when Dalton walked over or ran over in his little, they talk about this often, he ran over in his little underwear, nothing else. It's early in the morning. He's banging on the doorbell. Kelly comes to the door and he says that mom's been shot. Mom's not okay. And so by now the other little boy's coming out. So she runs back over. They're trailing behind. She runs up to the bedroom. She finds her. At this point, she can hardly speak, goes to a neighbor's house, and she calls 911. So that's what we just discussed now. So at this time, the boys are now 5 and 7 years old. I have a clip of Dalton, little 7-year-old Dalton. This is tough to listen to, but it's him talking to detectives once they arrive, and they get him later on back to the station, and they have a child trauma counselor talk to him and ask him these questions. I could not get it to get on StreamYard today, but I will let you at least hear it. It's kind of difficult to understand. He's just a tiny boy, and he is explaining exactly what he just witnessed.
And then I saw it come right by her, and it was blood right here. And then she went to wake up, and I thought she was sleeping.
So he just says, and I saw a gun right by her, and there was blood right here, and he indicates kind of his mouth and his nose. And he said, and she wouldn't wake up, and I thought she was sleeping. There's more of that, but it's devastating to listen to. And as Dalton spoke with both the dispatcher and the detectives, his dad was the one that killed his mom, per Dalton. But keep in mind, the kids never saw this. They never saw their dad come do anything, but it had gotten so bad at home that Dalton had been telling teachers and friends that he was worried his dad would hurt his mom. And Bart didn't know that this was happening. It makes you wonder now, too, at this day and age, we'd have like DCS would be there. We'd probably be calling for like a welfare check type situation at home, have somebody look into something, maybe talk to local police. I don't know. But evidently Dalton had been saying those kinds of things. All right. So a little bit also about Bart with the children. I was explaining to you kind of the way he was with Jennifer and his explosive nature with her. But with the children, as they got into, let's say, Little League baseball. Again, they were 5 and 7 by the time their mother died. So all of this was before they were 5 and 7 years old. And so let's say they didn't have the best game per his standards, Bart's standards. He was known to call them idiots, crybaby, losers. He smacked one of them in the face one time. These are all things that took place in front of people.
Yeah.
So I think we all kind of understand now that if someone's going to take things to that kind of length in front of the general public, not even just maybe your family members at a cookout, like the general public, we don't really know what all is going on at home, but you can probably rest assured it's much worse. So Heather is Jennifer's sister, and she is the first relative to hear the news. And she right away calls her mom and dad, Narda and Max. Max, Jennifer's father, says, I just hung up the phone and I drove straight to the house. I pulled up to the driveway behind a couple of Gwinnett County police cruisers. They wouldn't let me see my daughter. So he went to the neighbors to get Jennifer's sons. So the older one, I can't imagine any part of what he was going through right that moment. So the older boy, Dalton, was crying very hard. Of course, he'd been the one that had found his mother that morning. And so her dad will go on to say, he's running across the street in his underwear and he's going to remember constantly hitting that doorbell. So the police found Jennifer's body in her bedroom. She was dressed in a nightgown, lying on her side. There was a blood trail that went down from her nose directly down to the bed. So Chris Ross was the assistant DA at the time, and he helped investigate this case along with Danny Porter. Danny was the prosecutor of Gwinnett County. This is just outside of Atlanta, all right? So this is a suburb of Atlanta. Nice part of town. So there was a gun that was tucked under the sheet with her hand basically above it. I do have a picture. If YouTube lets me ever put this back up, then you'll be able to see this. Let's see here. Well, maybe I didn't upload that picture on purpose, but it's just a picture of her hand lying beside the gun and kind of how it's positioned on the bed. So we're going to discuss that here briefly in just a moment. There were divorce papers on the bed as well, kind of tucked almost behind the blanket beside her head. So we got a gun laying right by her hand, and we've got divorce papers right by her head, and it's interesting. So the initial impression by law enforcement at the time was suicide. All right. So there was a reason to believe that Jennifer Corbin could have killed herself. At least this is how they kind of articulated it. Initially, her marriage that once seemed so perfect was no longer that. There was evidence that she was worried that she may lose her children. So when she made the 911 call that resulted in he was leaving the house and he had her things with him and he ran over her foot, her concern when she called 911 was, I'm afraid he's going to take these things and use them against me. Now, she didn't mean, and I'm going to be, whatever, it's going to be so bad, but they're kind of articulating that, oh, she was terrified she was going to lose the house and the kids due to her affair that he had found out about, without maybe thinking of a clear head of like, well, hang on a second. He's having an affair. That doesn't mean he'd get all these things. So they're thinking that this just caused her to go in such despair that she would potentially be suicidal. So Jennifer's family were adamant that Jennifer would never have committed suicide. And more to the point, I know there's a lot of times family members will say that, but more to the point that she would never do that and also let her children be the one to find her. And that's what's one of the most horrible things I think about this entire story. So the investigators, like I said, did initially think suicide. So Bart initially was nowhere to be found. His mother finally was called when no one could get in touch with him, and she called Bart's brother, which is where Bart was staying. All right. So Jennifer, we'll talk a little bit about how she was in her room. She was lying on the bed. And the more that the detectives looked at this scene, the more it kind of started not looking right. All right. Mm-hmm. So it's noted that she's in a position a bit unnatural to have killed herself. Her hand has 0 blood on it, the hand that would have been used to pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. The gun was partially under the comforter. So if you picture your bed covers like up to, let's say, your chest or your abdomen, and then maybe it flips down a little bit, where it flipped down that 2 or 3 inches of fabric, the gun was partially under that. Okay. But it was like laying right beside her hand, almost as though it had been in her hand. Her hand literally just opened up, like right there on her chest or her belly. The medical examiner ruled that her hand wouldn't be where it was or the gun. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about a little bit of her autopsy later. So as word of Jennifer's death made its rounds, investigators get an interesting call. Mary Sue Day calls them with information. She's trying to decide if it's worth telling. So she's calling the Gwinnett County, so think Atlanta area, police, department. So she calls them and she says, I don't know if this is worth telling you about or not, but it's worth noting, I think. And she says that she has a cousin that was a dental student with Bart many, many years ago. She then tells them that he had been in a relationship, Bart, at that time, and his girlfriend died by way of suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head. But her family always doubted that to be the case. The detective was stunned at this information and immediately began to look into this story, meaning now they would be working in conjunction with the Augusta police. So now we have 2 jurisdictions, and we have Augusta and Gwinnett County working. So let's take you back to that first girlfriend that he had in dental school that this call-in alerted them to. In 1987, so just for timeline's sake, Jennifer died in 2004. Mm-hmm. Okay. In 1987, Dolly Hearn enrolled in the Medical College of Georgia School of Dentistry. Here she met Bart, and they hit it off pretty quickly. Friends recall they quickly began spending every moment together. But just mere months into dating, Bart wanted Dolly to marry him. Dolly was not ready for that quite yet, and in fact, his pushiness kind of turned her off. She told him she wanted to pursue her career first. He was insistent. He pressured her about it constantly, and he became increasingly controlling and wanted to know where she was at all times. He wanted to know who she was with at all times. So Dolly was telling her friends about Bart's behavior and finally chose to break up with him. He lost it. He begged her to stay. He threatened suicide. He said he couldn't live another day thinking of her being with another man. And finally, against the wishes of her friends, she agreed to get back with Bart. But by November of 1989, she had had enough. Days after she broke up with him, strange things started happening. All right. So let me give you a little bit of a list of some things that happened after she finally broke up with him the final time. In October of 89 is when Dolly broke up with him after about 1.5 years of on and off again dating. So November 14th, her cat was stolen from her apartment. On November 21st, her patient files were found in the trash. She had patient files that were stolen. So you've got to think they are in dentistry school. So they are nearing the end of dentistry school. It's getting very stressful. They've got a lot of work to do and a lot of projects. And she had these patient files that she had to have to make dental mold and all these things, just her work. They had been stolen. They were found in the trash. On the 27th of November, someone broke into Dolly's apartment and replaced her contact lens solution with hairspray.
Oh.
She came to school that day and asked a friend to look at it with her because her eyes were bright red and super irritated, and they smelled it and they came to the assumption that it was hairspray. And December 10th, her car was vandalized. Not only was it vandalized, but the gas tank was open and someone had poured paint in her gas tank. Paint. On December 11th, the next day, her mailbox was broken into. A package was stolen. During winter break, so that would have been probably just over Christmas time, her gas tank was, this is when it was filled with paint. The first time her car had been vandalized. Now it's filled with paint. Oh my goodness. So January and February, the thefts, harassment continued. There was a theft of a set of dentures that she had spent months working on. So you've got to understand this was a very big project, is working on making dentures for someone while you're in school like that. So there was a complaint against Bart to the student honor board over the dentures being stolen. And evidently the matter was dismissed due to lack of evidence. And then on February 23rd, Bart came to Dolly's apartment twice. He banged on her door, and the police were warned him to leave or to get arrested. And he did actually leave, and soon that harassment and the stalking seemed to stop. Okay, that was February 23rd of 1990. Let's see here. So on Wednesday, June 6th of 1990, Dolly's roommate returned home to find Dolly lying on the couch. She said that, like, from the minute she walked in, it just looked weird. You know how it is. It's interesting. Just seeing somebody from the back, you can tell if it's just a bit unnatural or not. So she walks in, sees Dolly on the couch. When she walks around the couch, she sees that Dolly is in fact covered in blood. There's a .38 revolver laying in her lap. Okay. Despite the statements of friends about her trouble with Bart, the police reports Dolly had filed as well that accused Bart of harassing her. The death was declared a suicide. Now, her family does have a bit of frustration, as you can imagine, at this time, because her dad knew what had been going on. In fact, she had borrowed that .38 from her father, and he and her brother actually went on to give Dolly some shooting lessons. Her dad once told her, you're going to find yourself in a dumpster if you don't quit hanging around with him. And also one time her father drove himself to Bart to tell Bart to leave his daughter alone. Sorry. All right. So it was left at this ruling of suicide for the next 14 years to the dismay of her family and friends. So the gun had been placed in front of her lap, and she was sitting with her legs crossed, like sitting up. And there's a gunshot wound off to the right back side of her head. So in 1990, as you can imagine, the scene looks a little different. So that happened, in 2004, the scene looks a little bit different because now they're looking at it with eyes of, we've got 14 years in now. So now they're investigating Jennifer's case. It's 2004. And now they are simultaneously looking back at Dolly's, both of which had initially been looked at as suicide. So evidently, when they look back at the pictures from the crime scene at Dolly's house from 1990, they only had 20 crime scene photos, first of all. So not a lot. Unfortunately, the gun, and I'm going to touch on this again later, was moved like right off the rip, like before they even took all the pictures. And so, but I think it's because they assumed that this had been a suicide, and so they didn't think there was going to be a case. I know that we'll talk on that in a minute, work it very differently at this point. But when they just initially assumed single gunshot wound to the back of the head, guns right there, it's a suicide. And I think that they didn't anticipate a case or needing to investigate these crime scene photos. But they quickly see when they just look at the photos this time that the blood that's on her left thigh was not at all spatter. This had not happened from the gunshot wound. This was transfer. This would be like if a palm that's bloody or something like that touched her thigh. And so it was pretty quickly determined that her body had been moved post-mortem. So there was no gunshot residue on her hand. And again, we don't have much blood on the hand that would have been the hand that shot the weapon. Okay, so police get serious about investigating Dolly's death as a homicide, and they take more statements. They kind of start from the beginning again, gathering the pieces together. So I'm going to read to you some more here. Let's see. So in January of 1990, 2 of her patient schedules went missing. This is just kind of a recap of some of the stuff that went on while she was in school. I'm actually going to skip that because I think we covered it pretty well. So investigators believe that this is what they kind of put back together now in 2004, going back to what happened in 1990. And they believe that around 1 p.m., Bart rang the doorbell and Dolly let him in. They both went into the living room, sat on the couch, and Bart begged for the two to get back together. Dolly rejected him again, and they began arguing, and the doorbell rang again. And as Dolly answered the door this time, Bart went into the bathroom. We know this to be fairly certain because the apartment complex's manager's assistant had come by. So the second doorbell ring was this manager's assistant to pick up a key from Dolly. She later testifies to seeing Bart's car in the parking lot and the silhouette of a man without a shirt hiding behind the bathroom door. So when she comes, he goes on, which already is super creepy that he's gone. He's like, he cannot be seen. He knows then what he's going to do. So after the assistant left, Bart must have emerged from the bathroom. The two continued their argument, which is speculated to have gotten very heated. Somehow Bart has gotten a hold of the .38 Rossi that Dolly's father had given her. He raised the gun and shot Dolly point blank in the head. She fell onto the couch. And then Bart went on to position her body on the couch in a relaxed position with her legs crossed in front of her. So that's already we'll get back to that, a little interesting, and placed the revolver in her hand. I'm not sure what he thinks every time that, like, I'm just going to shoot myself, hold onto the gun and lay it back in my lap. I mean, I know we've talked about the guns don't always do what you expect they're going to do in a suicide, but I'm not expecting it to almost still be in her hand in her lap at every turn. Around 1:30 p.m., Bart left the apartment, ensuring all of the doors were locked behind him. So we now know some of these things because now we've got different technology in 2004, right? So Bart then stopped at a payphone on his way to a lecture at the school. Get this, he calls Dolly's phone and leaves a message saying that something had come up and he'd be unable to take her to the party that night as they had planned. He even went so far as to say that he loved her and he'd see her tomorrow. So Bart is going on and securing a little alibi here, right? So Dolly's body was discovered around 5:15 that evening when her roommate Angela returned home. And that's when we went back and we talked about how she found her there with the blood and knew something terrible had happened. So Angela actually checked her pulse. She ran across the hall to a neighbor's apartment for help. And when she did, she gets Dr. Steinhaus. So it's a physician that happened to be at home. He rushed to Dolly's apartment to check her pulse and see if there's anything he can do there. But she was already gone by the time he got there, and I think she had been long gone. He then called 911. He did say to his wife, though, that people who commit suicide generally don't sit in a relaxed position with their legs crossed in front of them. And I know people do any number of things, but he took note of that day he went home, and his wife remembers him saying that, like, that just looked odd to him. And I think that when things look odd and stand out to us, there's often a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
So when first responders got to the scene, law enforcement immediately removed the gun from Dolly's lap to a safe location before they took all the photos of the firearm. So officers worked the scene. They took photographs. They got some evidence. They did swab her hands for gunshot residue, which I told you turned up nothing. Everything there was no forced entry or anything like that. When it comes to gunshot residue, I understand that it's not an exact science by any means. And we'll talk about this. The defense will later say that it doesn't always, it doesn't always show up, particularly if you've got a large tuft of hair, maybe that could absorb some of that. But experts for the prosecution will say, actually, though, with this type of a revolver, it would be very unlikely that it didn't show up. What would be your take or experience on that?
Yeah, the argument goes back and forth about gunshot residue. What they're probably talking about with a revolver, you can take a revolver, and what we're talking about, if people don't know firearms, it looks like the old cowboy gun, a wheel gun. It has a cylinder that rotates. You have bullets in these locked chambers. But when you fire the revolver, you can hold paper out by the side of the revolver if you ever wanted to see how the gas escapes. And sometimes it'll actually just cut the paper in half. It's probably what they're saying is that so much of the gas escapes out of the side, the closer you get the particles to the hand or the clothing, the better your results are going to be. That's why often in like drive-bys or someone's hanging out of a car window firing a slide-operated weapon, you're not going to always have
because it's all enclosed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're inside a home, and probably what they're saying.
I mean, the gun itself is enclosed, like in let's say a Glock or whatever, a 9mm, rather than the revolver.
Yeah, the gas is escaping,
out of the
out of the
area,
end of the barrel, and you have a chamber opening, shell casing, extracting. But probably what they're trying to say there is, if it's a revolver, if it's in a closed area, that there should be a better chance.
He just said it would be unlikely to not have in that scenario with that particular firearm. So the Gwinnett County detectives, remember that's Atlanta, so that would be Jennifer's case, were working to prove the murder and Bart's guilt there in Jennifer's death. So they've actually got to work a little bit harder. Remember, she was at home with the firearm that they already owned in her own bed, that kind of thing. He lived there. We'll talk about what his alibi was for that night. But when they go back to look at Dolly's, they've got some more concrete evidence when we look at the scene. I say concrete. It was circumstantial and partially in nature, but then we have the witness that was, the apartment manager assistant who saw a man and saw his car there. We at least can potentially put him there. And we've got that cell phone or payphone message to her not far from her home because they were able to track back where that came from. So, we've got a little bit more to tie Bart to Dolly's at that moment. So they're working hard, Gwinnett County, to get him tied to Jennifer's death. So they plan to charge him already with Dolly's murder. They've already switched hers from suicide, ruled it homicide, and they know they plan to charge him with her murder. So on December 22nd, 2004, Bart was charged with Dolly's murder, and police arrested him as he left his dental office. Funny, though, because someone actually tipped off the news, so the arrest was on camera as the news crew got there before he left his office, which I normally would not be a fan of. News crews being somewhere anticipating an arrest that he didn't know necessarily was coming. But in this case, it all worked out, and it was pretty great because Dolly's brother will go on to say, it's been 14, 15 years since her death, and her family has maintained this whole time it was not a suicide. So to see him, especially after the hell he had already put her through prior to her death, to be able to sit at home and watch on TV him being arrested, her brother said it was probably one of the happiest times he had had. So on January 5th, so just a couple weeks later, 2005, he was then charged with the murder of Jennifer. Okay. So Bart stated that the night Jennifer died, he had been out drinking with his brother. But there wasn't a whole lot to go on. So the police go on to get the ATF to execute a gun trace on the firearm that was found in Jennifer's bed. Okay. So that reveals that the pistol had been sold at a Birmingham, Alabama hardware store in 1957. So remember, they're in Georgia. So the gun that Jennifer was killed by her own hand or someone else's had been purchased in 1957. So this is long before Bart, was born. So investigators then interview the neighbors, right? Kelly and Steve, the neighbors that the children had run over to when they found their mother. So Stephen tells the police that he actually heard something odd the night of Jennifer's death, that around 1:30 in the morning, Bart's truck pulled up to the home and then drove off after about 30 minutes. There's conflicting, like sometimes he'll say, like, I can hear it because I hear that truck every single day of my life. That's my neighbor. Like, I know what his truck sounds like. And then one source, I actually think it was an interview with him, which then I would go off with that. I think he was outside smoking a cigarette because he had gotten home late from being out himself that night. So either way, he says at 1:30 in the morning, Bart's truck pulls up to their home and drives off 30 minutes later. Now, something that Steve noted that was interesting to him was that he didn't turn the truck off. He left it running when he got out. And Steve said that his words to himself were, his thoughts to himself were, I hope he's not doing something stupid.
Oh.
But I mean, you've got to think he was aware of a lot of the things that were going on in the home. Okay. So Bart's return to the home actually aligned with Jennifer's time of death, which the medical examiner estimated to be between 2 and 3 that morning. So the medical examiner found no alcohol in Jennifer's system. There had been a half a glass of wine on the nightstand, and the narrative had been that maybe she died by suicide after a night of drinking and being in despair over this divorce. So the autopsy established that the path of the bullet had actually severed Jennifer's brainstem, resulting in loss of all motor function. So think about what we're saying. If that happened, the way the medical examiner says, her hand would not go. That bullet wound was in the back of her head. Her hand would not fall then forward and on her chest and her belly with her laying in the bed like that. The pattern of blood dripping out of her nose was not consistent of the way she had been shot either, in terms of the direction it was dripping. And the gun most certainly wouldn't have come back with her hand to then get under that lip of the comforter. Remember, it was under the fabric of the comforter. It would have gone back behind her because she immediately lost function, like motor function, when it severed her spinal cord. This, to me, is a bit reminiscent of Ellen Greenberg, who was ruled a suicide. We're going to talk more on that, though, because some things are changing in that case, thankfully. But the fatal wound was actually a wound to her chest, but she had wounds from stabbing behind her in her upper neck. And one of those wounds would have severed her spinal cord, rendering her completely immobile. Yet, in theory, she was supposed to have then been able to continue to stab herself in the chest. So, either way, this is good science. This is not subjective, artful science. This is straightforward. If her spinal cord was severed, she could not move. Therefore, the gun would not be under the lip of the comforter and her hand nicely on top of her. Okay. So, the gunshot residue test that was conducted on Jennifer's hand came back again negative. So now we have 2 of them. Neither one have the gunshot residue. And the forensic pathologist did rule her death a homicide at that point. The gun also, I know for sure in Dolly's, and I believe in Jennifer's as well, had no fingerprints on them.
Okay.
So we may not have gunshot residue. That can be whatever. But I imagine these women would leave fingerprints on a gun.
Meaning when they processed it, nothing.
No fingerprints. Yeah. Meaning not his fingerprints, not their fingerprints. No, He also was a dentist who washed his hands and wore latex gloves all day long every day. Right? Or was fully in the habit of washing, new pair of gloves. Take them off, wash, new pair of gloves. So the Gwinnett County investigators then did a forensic analysis of Bart's cell phone, and that shows that his phone actually pinged a tower near his home, meaning where Jennifer died, at around 1:45 that morning. That would not be the same cell tower to ping his phone if he were, in fact, at his brother's house where he said he had been.
Gotcha.
Okay. So this puts him actually correlating with when the neighbor says he heard the truck pull up. He said around 1:30. The cell phone pings at 1:48. Would you like to know one of the most egregious details in this whole case to me? And it's going to be what that cell phone pinged. The call that was made when it pinged at 1:48. There was an actual call made.
Okay.
That call was made, and he left a message with the marriage counselor stating that he was canceling the next day's appointment.
Ooh. Because he didn't want to get charged?
I guess. And he knew he wasn't going to be going.
Oh, man.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Because
had
that
read
would have been
pages and dozens of pages, watched shows, listened to podcasts, all this stuff. And when I heard that detail, oh, man.
And,
talk about forethought.
Yeah. Now, hold on. I apologize. Go
ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
What time was that again? Like 1 something?
1:48 a.m.
When was she discovered?
The next morning by her child.
Yes, that's right. I wonder if that, like, he calls right after it happens, like in a panic, to basically give himself more time. Obviously, I know it sounds kind of simple, but meaning sometimes, like, maybe trying to get ahead of himself, like, now there'll be no
somewhere I've got to be tomorrow.
Exactly. There's nowhere I need to be. There's nowhere she needs to be.
One thing I'm not gathering from Bart is panic.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If he went there and left the truck running,
mm-hmm.
he had full intention to do what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He had done it once before, and it worked. Mm-hmm. You know, I've heard people reference, you know, the Michael Peterson case on this, the staircase case. If you've ever seen that incredible, like, it'll blow your mind documentary. And long story short, without getting into it, a man, you know, is charged with killing his wife by way of throwing her downstairs. And there's a lot of wazoo defenses and all these crazy things that come up with it. But as you watch it for, I don't know, a long time, then they take you back to years prior, and he had lived in Germany years prior, and his other wife had died by falling downstairs. And he had never been charged in, you know, or implicated in that being foul play or anything like that. So it's kind of the same idea. Like, well, it worked the first time. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
Well, and he's an arrogant dude. So is that Michael Peterson, but this guy, Bart, is very arrogant.
And we're both, I may have missed this, we're both of these incidents with revolvers? Or
it was the Jennifer's. I don't believe Jennifer's was. I know it was a 38. Hers was a 38 caliber Rossi revolver, Dolly's.
Mm-hmm.
I'll find
out. Which that was
sure.
the family provided her that.
Yes, we know where that came from.
But I was curious too, like.
Well, we're going to talk about that gun right now, actually. Okay. If you remember, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I got ahead of myself.
Well, if you remember, when they traced that firearm, it had gone back to being sold in Birmingham, Alabama, at a hardware store in the 1957. So Bart did not purchase that weapon initially new from that hardware store. Okay, and that's all they had at the time. So. Let's see all these papers. We're about to get to that. But fun tidbit about Bart, when he was told that the Augusta Police Department had reopened the case about Dolly's death all those years prior, he said, quote, "Yeah, I don't know why they care so much about that bitch."
Oh.
Yeah. And her family and others will say that's the only way he referred to her at all when he would talk about her. Yeah. And this is after her death. Well, so I'm just saying it's starting to show some glimpses to other people his personality that maybe they hadn't seen before. So Bart winds up, remember, money's not too much of an object at this point, or a problem at this point. So he hires some pretty high profile attorneys, David Wolf and Bruce Harvey. So these two, you may or may not remember, but they successfully defended NFL star Ray Lewis, who had 2 murder charges, and they were confident they could do the same for Corbin. Okay. So their angle was just the idea that everything's circumstantial. You can't put him there. We don't necessarily have just hardcore witnesses. They really want to go off the angle of like her being desperate and just the despair of the divorce, the fear of having her name dragged through the mud with this online affair that she had, particularly because it was a woman and that she was going to lose her kids and her home, you know, and that's really kind of all they had. But the prosecution felt pretty solid with the info they had, although their case was still full of holes without something more concrete. They had to tie that gun to Bart somehow. They weren't known necessarily to have already had a gun in the home, and they
Mhm.
needed to figure out when and how this gun was obtained. So remember how I said it was sold in Birmingham in the 50s, right?
Mhm.
So the prosecution knew that Bart had a friend in Alabama. So we've got the gun came from Alabama, and now we've got Bart having a friend in Alabama. His name was Richard Wilson. They suspected that Richard Wilson gave Bart the gun, but he wouldn't talk. So they asked him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. No, I didn't. I don't." And he's tight-lipped about it. So Danny Porter, again, this was the prosecutor on the case. This is all per NBC News, what I'm about to read to you. So Danny Porter says, so we just keep going back. We keep poking him. We re-review the cell phone records. We're finally able to determine that Bart was in Troy, Alabama on November 3rd of 2004 and had spoken to Richard Wilson. So November 30th was just one day after Bart filed for divorce and 5 days before she was shot.
Oh.
So we're really narrowing this one down, okay?
Mhm.
It was circumstantial, but it's strong circumstantial evidence that they had not had prior. And but it's just not enough yet to put that gun in the possession of Bart, right, in Bart's hands. So a few weeks before the trial, I know that they were sweating. I mean, they're getting down to the nitty gritty. Investigators ran an advanced computer search of the gun's serial number, and finally they get a break. So the search showed that in 2002, the gun was run by the Troy, Alabama Police Department. So Troy, Alabama is the town where Richard Wilson lived and Bart had visited.
Mhm.
The prosecution was close, but there was, nothing concrete just yet. But by now it was September 11th, and it was the day that jury selection began.
Oh.
Are you getting nervous as with your former job? Are you feeling
Yeah.
the heat on this one?
I've been in that situation.
Woo! So then on day 2, as the prosecutor questioned potential jurors, he noticed that his lead investigator was trying to grab his attention. All right, let's see here. So he says, this is that Danny Porter, he says, my chief investigator comes up and hands me a note that says, quote, you have to come out of the courtroom right now. It was underlined and had an exclamation point. He said, I looked at him and he went and he mouthed, it's the gun.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I stood up and I said, Judge, there's been a development in the court. Can I be excused? And I walked out. So his investigator tells him that the police chief in Troy, Alabama had just re-questioned Richard Wilson about this gun. And Danny Porter, the prosecutor, says, you're going to have to tell the truth. Or he says that the chief there in Troy said, you're going to have to tell the truth. You're going to have to go to Georgia and do the right thing. And Richard Wilson hung his head and he said, I gave him the gun. And his statement was, he said that Bart gives him the story that his wife was fooling around on him and he thought he needed a gun to protect himself. This is what he tells Richard Wilson. And he asked me if I had one. And I'd gotten one a while back because I traded it for a used lawnmower. He just bartered with somebody. He said, so I said he could have it if he thought he needed it. So he came down here and got it. And so Danny Porter said, it's a bombshell in this case. I went up and I told the defense attorneys. And at that point, I don't think I could have told them anything worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think the stunned amazement was the reaction that I got. And then you go on to hear Wolf, the defense attorney, say it was pretty devastating coming as late as it did. It sort of dispels anything else that we really had to, argue suicide or homicide. So the DA did think the case was a slam dunk at this point. So he talks to Bart's attorneys. So he said, I told him at this point, now is the time. The best deal you're going to get is a plea to murder and life in prison. You either take it today or we move forward toward it today, or we're going to go on and continue with the trial. So you guys know that if he doesn't take that plea deal, he would then go to trial and risk a jury conviction, in which case he could potentially get the death penalty. But if he takes the plea, then they offered him, the deal would be that he, agrees to life in prison, and he would have to say that he's guilty, but he would avoid the death penalty and whatever risk that he might take with the jury. All right. So the prosecutor said that if we're going to have a package deal, we're going to wrap both cases up and you're going to stand up in court and admit that you killed Dolly Hearn and Jennifer Corbin. And he did just that. Bart got sentenced to 2 back-to-back life sentences with the possibility of parole. He is incarcerated at the Central State Prison in Macon, Georgia, and he was eligible, for parole back this past May of 2024. So I'm not sure where he is in his appeals process or any of that parole process now. And just a little, because I like to leave you guys kind of with some questions sometimes. An acquaintance of Bart's from years prior, Harriet Gray. All right. So they worked in some capacity in the same circles as dentists early on. She was approximately 20 years Bart's senior. There's conflicting reports about whether or not they were romantically involved. I know I've not given you anything concrete here, but they did work together on and off. The week before Bart and Jennifer got married in 1996, Harriet went missing. She was found 1 year later when divers just so happened to find a car. Like they weren't there for this. It'd been a year gone by. Divers are in Lake Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They find her car. It was the windows were covered in algae, so they didn't know anything was inside it. They pull it to the surface where they find Harriet's body had been floating in it. She had been duct taped to the steering wheel.
Oh.
The investigators state that currently that they are no longer pursuing a connection to her death and Bart. Initially, of course, they did look into that. But a couple of different cellmates have stated that, like, when they ask him about either did you kill your girlfriend or did you kill your wife, he'll say things like, I can't talk about the case. But when they ask about this, he'll say, no, that happened a couple of days in my honeymoon. They can't pin me for that one. I didn't kill that one.
Yeah.
Right. So if he did, terrible, not his MO, it looks like. If he didn't, like, I don't want to be around this dude. Like, what luck befalls these women near this guy?
Time out.
Yeah.
When did she go missing?
96, the week before he got married to the wife he killed in the bedroom.
With the pistol he had to borrow from
the guy in Alabama.
So because he didn't
it's about
have
2
a
hours
gun,
and 45 minutes away. I already looked it up.
Meaning he didn't have a gun. That's a different way to.
This is true. So I looked up the distance between Tuscaloosa and Troy for that exact reason.
Gosh, you're smart.
You're smart.
No, you are. That's horrible.
Yeah, it's very horrible. But that's the case, and it is solved. So I feel like everybody can take a deep breath in one way because we always leave you with these unsolved and a lot of theories and questions. But this one is wrapped up. I'll show you Bart's beady little eyes if you want to see them.
Both gunshot wounds were to the back of the head. Is that right?
Or yeah, like not back, but
like just
back
behind the ear, maybe or something.
Yeah, not in the forehead. The one had said like that on the prosecution side had said that between where the bullet was, I believe in Jennifer's case, could have been Dolly's. Either way, she couldn't have held it, put it there at point blank, been able, and then like with the distance of the barrel to where the handle of the gun was, then down to the trigger, and been able to execute enough force to then pull the trigger. And then in both cases, they've got a gun laying on their laps, basically, after shooting themselves behind the head. I don't think any of that was rendered, like, that was pretty clear science when they looked at the scene. And
yeah, a lot of times, people will say stuff like, there's no way someone could shoot themselves that way.
Oh, yeah, but that's Jennifer and Bart, if you're watching. Go ahead.
But when you have to reenact something and you use the actual weapon, you can see that you can get in very strange angles, but also sometimes you can't, like you're saying, like you physically can't.
And even if she physically could have, she's not hanging on to that gun to then bring it back around.
Yeah. So also, like, if you are in, bullet trajectories are, their own interpretation sometimes because they're hitting surfaces, they're hitting skull, they're, but if they can follow a clear path, especially like with a contact shot to the head, it will be interesting, or not interesting, but when you compare them to be able to see what that angle is, because it's not common.
I'll put it on Instagram. I do have a mock-up of the angle of the trajectory of the bullet, I think in Dolly's case. And Dolly was the one, if you remember, was on the couch. So where Jennifer was kind of in the bed, I would, from what they say, I presume, had it been suicide, the gun would have then fallen kind of back the pillow, like kind of back down in that direction, because
like recoil.
Yeah, well, and also because she immediately would have, not that you don't always immediately let go, but again, that's one where it was around in front of her, and like if this is the comforter, like kind of like this, it was kind of under it, and her hand is like touching it.
Yeah.
But her spinal cord had been severed. So I mean, I know your arms flop, but the way she was propped, it would have flopped. It wouldn't have come back around here to then hang on to the gun that was tucked in her fabric.
Yes. So like if
I'm showing pictures of Jennifer Corbin as we speak right now.
Yeah, if I've got and a lot of that's going to depend on the length of the barrel and that sort of thing. But if I've got a pistol back here, if I'm holding it all down here at a weird angle, and it's going to recoil out this way, or it's going to recoil back this way, I think is what you're saying. That the ME is saying the spinal cord's being severed, so therefore this arm
drops immediately.
Is going to drop exactly. So if I fire a weapon and the recoil kind of goes back a little bit, but my arm is completely dead, the pistol should be falling somewhere back here, right? Is what you're saying.
It's not going to tuck itself under the comforter on your belly, right?
Yeah. Usually if you see things like that, that's when someone has fired the weapon and yet has not fully...
Right, took a second.
Yeah. So maybe they moved just a little bit. Or
you can keep talking, but just this is a picture. So Dolly, this is Dolly from in the 80s. Remember, she was murdered at Bart's hand in 1990. So this fashion is prime on point. She was a knockout dental student. Here she is with a practice patient in the clinic. And that's Dolly. I showed you Bart's beady eyes there. Ugh.
If I could say, one of the things you mentioned earlier about the family saying, "Hey, you got to stay away from it," and "Hey, don't go back." And I know it's very easy to sit here and say that, but it's true. 100%.
Oh yeah.
The minute anything like that starts to show any type of abuse,
get out.
Verbal, psychological, physical, get out. Sever ties and don't go back. That's that domestic violence cycle that I think a lot of people now are pretty familiar with, but it's that honeymoon phase, or it's that phase of, some people have expressed, I was more scared not being around him, because when I'm around him, at least I know where the threat is. When I'm not with him, now the threat can be anywhere at all times. It is. And I've talked to people before where, and it just happens to be men and women in this situation, but men holding a gun to their head and saying, I'll kill myself if you don't do this. In one incident, and these weren't even on the job. So in one incident where it's like, I will kill you and then I'll kill myself. So it's almost like these threats of violence to the person if them saying they're going to self-inflict. If that's not getting it, then I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to kill myself. Like, and sadly.
Well, and that's what he said. That's what Bart told Doc. He wound up saying that he was going to, I'm not sure he put a gun to his head, but he told her he was going to kill himself if she left. He would rather die than, imagine her with anyone else. And it worked because she took him back one time. And the thing is and it often does work, I know, but like with Jennifer, keep in mind, there's a difference there. They'd been together for a few years. They had a couple kids. They were married. Not that she shouldn't have left him the minute he hauled off and punched her in the face or any of the other things he did. But maybe you could look at it like it was more complex for her to leave maybe than the girlfriend in dental school or whatever. But she didn't leave. And most of their stuff, she started getting really obviously bothered by him the more he increased with his anger and his angry tendencies toward the children. It's like almost like she was going to live with it a little bit, but she got tired of it. But he started kind of turning on them as they were getting older. And that's when she wanted to leave. But the difference is with Dolly is he started doing all that weird stalking and vandalizing, and like that's a no-go. That's a no.
Yeah, and that's That's what I mean. Like that, even that little,
to scare
that little
them.
bit when it first shows itself, it's sometimes easier to sever right then before there's
Ugh.
years and years. But that behavior doesn't change; it only gets worse. And I hope people understand that now. But I mean,
for anybody wondering, Jennifer's two sons, Dalton and Dylan, have, from what I understand, had, despite these circumstances, a really good upbringing. Her sister Heather immediately adopted the boys. Heather's married. They already had 2 children around the same age as the boys, and have raised the 4 of them just together. And that way, so you've got to think they should be 25 and 27 now. So still young adults. I'm sure all of this is very crisp in their brains, but it sounds like the best has come out of the worst situation in that sense, at least. And so they, unfortunately, sometimes in these situations, children don't have a loving family member to go to. So, so that is good. We've got just a few things cooking. I'm just going to tease a little bit that we've been in talks with somebody, and we might be having a sponsor.
I'm not counting chickens before.
No, I'm not either.
Eggs before they hatch.
I'm not either, but I wouldn't say it either if I didn't feel a little more confident.
Yeah.
So that's exciting for us, y'all, since we've been independent. So we're looking forward to that. And if it comes through the way that we hope it will, I'm really excited because it's actually a really cool company. Yeah. But not to be weird and all teasy like that, but it's just new. I bust at the seams. I have to say things.
Yeah. And then I get all nervous, like, ooh, I hope it happens.
Last week we covered Kathy Jo Bolkin. If you haven't, please listen to that. That's one of those that we kind of call unresolved. Like there had been a charge that was acquitted, and it was a very polarizing case in a small town in Iowa, in the sense that people still to this day kind of fuss and fight over maybe what happened in that case. And at the end of the day, a 22-year-old mother of a 4-year-old child was murdered in a very horrific way. And so in saying that was a long time ago. And I don't know, that was 93. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was 93. Anyway, so we've got some ideas on that case, but if you haven't listened, go back and take a listen. I had actually been in some communication. We spoke with a few people in her family. I'll just kind of leave it at that, and discuss the case. And they were super gracious, and glad that some eyes are on it. It's just very underreported. It was not a very heavily reported case whatsoever. And then I got jail mail, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Just so people are aware, the one thing that I love about doing the show with you is that you get an idea and then you go do it. Like no matter what, you're like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And that was one of them. And you figured out how to do it, and got a response.
Got a response.
So some people have ideas, they have thoughts, they want to do something, and they just kind of sit on it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that you act, and I like that. And you reach out. I kind of asked
your permission on that one a little bit.
Well, not like that.
Not like that.
Like, no, just being like, hey, what do you think of this? Not like, yeah, I know what you mean. But also like that you reach out to, to reach out to family members, or family members reach out to you, and they often talk about how respectful you are and covering the cases. And I don't know, I guess that's just my way of saying thank you. I love being on the show and doing it with you, because you do show respect, and we talk a lot off the show, obviously, about cases and about things that happen that we don't even cover on the podcast sometimes, but it's just important to me. And just want to say
thank you for saying that. No, I just, particularly since we do and I think that's another reason why, I don't always invite a bunch of family members on shows, just because if it's an unresolved case, unless it's something they're trying to get the word out about, it can obviously stir up a lot of stuff that sometimes people have learned to kind of live in a certain space with something and kind of just be okay with that and not really want to revisit all these terrible open wounds all the time. But even if I'm not putting them on the show, I will, depending on the situation, sometimes reach out just to get, and honestly, also just to give them an opportunity if they want to say something, not even on the show. If they just want to say, yeah, please convey this about my loved one, or please say that these are my thoughts on what happened. I think that sometimes just the idea that it's not that we have this huge show and we got these, just crazy amount of listeners, but we're getting there, but it's enough that it only takes one or two sometimes in some of these cases. And so, to give someone a space maybe a little bit bigger than what they've had to say something on is I think nice if they choose to, want to do that. But either way, we really appreciate you guys. We'll figure out the YouTube portion of this. Evidently, I said something that violated community standards. So we were just about 20 minutes in and we got dropped from YouTube. So if you were one of the listeners in the chats or you were listening live earlier, I'm not sure yet what I said or what happened, but we'll try to figure that out. On YouTube, it's really not hard to do this. They drop you pretty easily. So we'll figure that out. Either way, we will be dropping this to Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff in the next couple of days. As always, you can go to Andrea Up Late and see all the night shift cases there. I'll upload pictures, some audio, things like that from this case, as I do every week. You can visit me on YouTube at the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel for night shift. You can find Brian you want to tell them where they find you on YouTube?
Yes. The Disruptors, BC and Ski is the YouTube channel. Yep. I've got a website, The Disruptors with Brian Sanders, where they can take training courses and that sort of thing.
Check that site out. It's actually it's pretty cool and informative, whether you take a class or not. Just go tell them that website one more time.
Yeah, The Disruptors with Brian Sanders. And right now it's got several very gang specific courses that people can take. But eventually I'm going to put links on there too for investigative courses, some things like we've talked about, crime scene. One of the things that
a lot of the night shift listeners have been asking for that.
I know, and I just bear with me, but we're going to get to it. But things like that too, like suicide, death investigations, that the average person, life will be a little bit easier for them if they did understand that. Maybe they wouldn't get so frustrated, or if they experience it within their family, sometimes it's a little easier to understand.
Sure.
But yes. And then Instagram is _disruptors_podcast.
Perfect. It's fantastic. Is that it? Yeah. We did last night get to witness. I don't know about you guys if you saw the super moon last night. There's a super moon. It was actually called a super blue moon. So it was a super moon and a blue moon all at once. Everybody around here I know has been putting pictures up. I'll have to just show you guys like 3 of these real fast before we go, because it was hot pink. That's just with my iPhone, y'all. That's obviously not some great camera, but the moon was ultimately, as the sun went down and the moon came up, it became almost as bright as the sun, and it started out hot pink, orange like that, and then did one of these and lit up the whole sky. That's in between, I guess that one is, and then it ended like this. But that's the moon, not the sun. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was probably one of the best.
I've never seen anything quite like that. Yeah.
The way it came up over the water too, it was like within seconds it showed itself.
Yeah.
It was great.
Oh, well, you ready to wrap up?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. More to come. Hey, keep those case ideas coming, you guys. The ones of you who have sent them, I haven't forgot you. I am still, I mean, I can only do one a week. So I am looking into all the stuff. So don't think I forgot you. You can always knock on our door. We're here, want to hear what you got to say. And we really appreciate you. So moving forward, I guess we'll be back around next Tuesday. I think we're going to cover, I put it in my story and there was a decent amount of interest, the Ellen Greenberg case. So we will be talking about that. That was one that was ruled suicide a long time ago. And it is absolutely insane to me that was ruled suicide. That's one that we talked about kind of at length, where sometimes something that looks really crazy actually still is a suicide for sure. This one did not seem to be one medically that could have been. So we're going to get into that. You can follow the Justice for Ellen page on Instagram there as well. They put a lot of case updates on there, and it looks like it's gaining momentum. And the Supreme Court, there where they live, has decided to go on and reopen the case and investigate it to determine whether or not they're going to keep that ruling of suicide or not. So that's what the family's been pushing for this whole time. So that's good news on their end for sure. Either way, we appreciate you guys, like I said, and we can't wait to talk to y'all again. We'll try to get this back up on YouTube if I can. You want to tell them good night?
You tell them good night.
Well, I'm going to tell them good night.
Oh, I will tell them good night.
All righty.
Good
Okay. Well, until next time, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night, y'all. Ew, I don't want his face on there. Hold on. Good night.
What the world?
I don't know. God bless America.